Hey, come investigate with me the portals that the Cherokee Indians developed. As we go to investigate this portal, we have a chance to realize that the portal was very close to the retreat center with Jim Gore in Black Mountain, North Carolina. So this is how this happens. So after he had come to Jacksonville, we met and began to trade information, and we began to correspond. So about 6 months or more later, Don comes to me again, and I said, Don, you're not burnt out from what happened in Yuma? He says, no, I want to go with you. I said, okay, remember what I told you, be careful what you ask for. So we decided to plan a retreat up in Black Mountain, North Carolina. And they have a lodge, about 7 or 8 bedrooms, that his family of about 7 to 8 people, kids lived. And Jim Gore was a part of the Eisenhower cabinet in the 1970s, 60s, and 70s. And he went and worked in the Pentagon. He had 2 PhDs, and one was in nuclear physics. And everything that he was reading coming across in the Pentagon told him that, you know what, World War III is right around the country. And he realized with the angels would appear to him, and they had taught him a 7-step of effective prayer that actually came from the Gospel of John the Beloved. And so we got up there. I remember it was a Friday afternoon, and we were in the dome in the Light Center. And I asked about the portal, and I remember one of the girls that was working, that was the caretaker of the Light Center, took me up to the lodge to meet with Jim privately. And as we were sitting there by the lodge, I looked up on Bald Mountain, and you could see coming down from the mountain, it was a swirling tunnel, like a vortex. And this was the vortex that the Cherokee Indian supposedly did penance and spiritual sadhanas for over 300 years to open up this portal. So we decided that weekend to attend his workshop. As we began to attend his workshop, a lady toward the end of the first day on Saturday asked him, she says, I know we're all the living Christ. I know that a lot of the 144,000 people are here on the earth right now. But I also know that at any given time, one Christ is more advanced than the other Christ. And so as this world's going into ascension, as the earth is going into ascension, who is going to be the embodiment of the Christ? We know 2,000 years ago, it was Jesus. Several thousand years before that, in India, it was Krishna. And several thousand years before that, it was Ram, Lord Rama, Ram and Sita. But who is it? He said, well, the person will be the reincarnation of Sri Yukteswar. That will be the advanced Christ that's coming back in this lifetime. So it was really kind of funny. So afterwards, Jim had been watching me and looking at me, and he asked me to give a Tai Chi demonstration toward the end of that Saturday segment. So I got up and I began to move, and Jim got up afterwards and said, you know what, there's Tai Chi, and then there's Tai Chi Gong. And Jim described the story of meeting Master Bo Yang when he was on a prayer vigil in Shanghai, China, and they would come out of the Marriott and they'd look across the street in the park, and they would see 3 and 4 generations of family doing Tai Chi in the morning. But he came out on the 3rd morning of the prayer vigil, and he noticed that my master Bo Yang was out there doing it. He said before he knew it, that soul and that spirit was inside of him. And he said it was the most beautiful feeling, and he could smell jasmine all throughout, the scent of jasmine. So he asked for me to be sent to him to meditate and pray. I'll never forget, Don's sitting on a couch, He's out in the lobby as I go in to decide to meditate with Jim Gore. We're sitting down, we're opposite each other. There's an old saying Babaji used to say, and that is, the greatest thing that can happen between two people is they become one another. So the next thing I know, Jim and me, we had reversed each other, and we had seen a soul. And in one hand, there was John the Beloved meeting again Paul, and here we were back in Jerusalem. Christ had just been crucified, and we're walking around together. Well, Jim already knows that the Lama was a reincarnation of Sri Yukteswar. So after about 45 minutes of meditation, Jim opens his eyes, he looks at the Lamaji, and he says, "Do you know who you are?" And I said, "Yes, sir, of course I know who I am." He says, "Well, when are you going to let the world know?" And I said, "My time has not come yet. I'm waiting for the Holy Spirit to tell me when that will be and what that vehicle will be." I'll never forget, we come walking out of this meeting, and I remember I couldn't feel the floor. And the next thing I do is I look down at the floor, and I'm walking 2 or 3 feet off the floor, and my head was getting close to the ceiling. Well, that was enough to make things very interesting. What was more interesting than that is right in front of me was my student Don, and he was looking at me, and he was walking. Boy, you should have seen his eyes. They got big as saucers. I'll never forget that look on Don's face. And the next thing we're walking, he says, "You realize that you walked out of that room and you never touched the floor until you came over to sit down with me on the couch." And I looked at him and I just smiled. I said, "Well, Spirit's amazing, isn't it?" And I'll never forget that moment. So years later, Jim and me would correspond. Jim had had several experiences with Jesus and Buddha showing up out of the portal. They would come right through the portal there on Bald Mountain. And as he'd be meditating on the porch, he would see Jesus, and he would see Buddha. And I remember he said when he had the experience of Babaji, nothing was like that, because his spirit and energy was so powerful. The portal came one day, and as it opens up, Jim could just start to say, he could hear mantra going. He could hear all of nature. He said the bugs, everything was chanting, "Babaji." And then it would be a pause. And it was Babaji. And then it was like Babaji and Babaji. And Babaji in Sanskrit means simple father. Simple father. And he looked at Jim Gore, and he appeared to Jim in that very popular looking body that we see in the autobiography of yoga, that eternal yoga body. And in that eternal yoga body, he looked at Jim Gore. He says, "I've been in this body for 36,000 years. And he says, "Well, what are you doing here?" He says, "I'm here to show human potentiality, that I'm showing how a human can be immortal if they choose to be, by bringing the spirit, mind, and body." He looked at Jim, knowing that Jim was Paul, knowing that him and me had gotten together, and he said, "This is that time." And you got to remember, this is like 1985, 86. That's when we're talking about, right? So it's really powerful when you think about that. 2 or 3 years later, Jim will leave the planet. We'll talk about that in another time to come. Baraka Bashai, may the blessings be to you and to your glorious family. I hope you've enjoyed the story today about Mount Kailash and the vortex at Black Mountain.